Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. This is the Water Quality Protection Land Speaker Series. I'm Audrey Stewart. I'm the volunteer coordinator for Austin Water Wildland Conservation Division's programs, which are the Balcones Canyonlands Preserve, which protects endangered species habitat in Western Travis County, and the Water Quality Protection Lands. So the Water Quality Protection Lands safeguard groundwater in the Barton Springs segment of the Edwards Aquifer through the conservation and restoration of large connected areas in Hays and Travis County. By protecting these native grassland, savanna, healthy riparian corridors, the water quality protection lands not only provide high quality water to recharge the aquifer, but also protect habitat for lots of species, protect cultural resources, and allow for research opportunities to better understand all the important resources that are protected by these lands. Today, we're happy to have Matt Laurie here. Matt Laurie is Austin Water Wildland Conservation's Wildland Fire Program Coordinator. He's going to present to us on prescribed burns. So Matt joined us in January 2020 after spending 6 seasons as the wildland firefighter in Western states like California and Idaho, and also here in Texas. In addition to a wildland firefighting background, Matt has worked on conservation projects across Texas. After the presentation, there's going to be a Q&A, so please put your questions in the Q&A box. You should see a little Q&A icon. That's where you can put your questions. There's also a chat, but we won't be using that for the Q&A. I'll be putting information into the chat throughout, including links for how to sign up for guided hikes and volunteer events, where you can find a recording of this later on once we post that to our YouTube channel and Facebook, and things like that. And Matt will be mentioning things that I'll then add links to as he goes along too. So on that note, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Matt Laurie. Matt, thanks so much for being here.
What we're going to talk about today is just prescribed burns, the planning and benefits. So what we're looking at when we go into these operations and why we do it. So I want to, take a step back before we get into the guts of the presentation to kind of tell you guys what a prescribed burn is. The thing with this terminology, it can get kind of confusing, especially when we're dealing with the public and folks are wondering, like, what exactly is a prescribed burn? What are we doing? What are our objectives? And so this is basically something that we do. It's a land management tool designed to mimic the conditions under which these savanna systems here in Central Texas evolved. And we're trying to put fire on the ground to get fire back into these systems where it's been absent for a pretty long time. And it's a critical ecosystem service, and we're trying to get it back into play and to get these landscapes back in their normal mode of function. So you may hear them referred to as well as RX burns. That can be kind of confusing when we're kind of going back and forth between the two. The RX there goes back to the prescribed and goes back to the idea of a prescription. So what we're hoping to achieve with that prescription is to dial in the set of conditions, whether that's fuel, weather, fire behavior, dialing in those conditions to make sure that we're able to achieve the fire effects that we're hoping to get. So RX burns, prescribed burns, same idea, and the overall intent is just to make sure that we're getting fire back on the landscape. One thing before we get any further, I want to point out as well is that it's really important when we go into this that we have clear, measurable objectives, right? We talk about SMART objectives, so they should be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. So we're trying to make sure that what we're doing isn't just, we're going to go out there and put fire back on the landscape, but we want to achieve certain fire effects, and we do the best we can to tailor the conditions to just getting those fire effects to occur, and also being able to do it safely. So those are some of the keys to the what of a prescribed burn. So moving into planning the burn, we look at a number of different things. There are 21 elements in a prescribed fire plan. So we go through a big long checklist, and there's a number of different items that we need to hit. We talked about objectives just a little bit ago. So that's one of the most important things that we're looking at. Just to make sure that we understand what we're going to go do out there, why we're doing it, and what we're hoping to achieve. But we're also looking at the prescription, right? So that goes not just to getting those fire effects, but also to make sure that we're going to do it safely and that we've we've designed a burn plan that is going to achieve those effects and do it, keep the fire in the box, make sure that we're doing everything that we can to make sure that it's the safest operation we can put together. So with that goes that firing and holding plan, right? So this is, we're figuring out what resources that we need to execute firing and holding, and we're also trying to make sure that we're designing the firing plan to make sure that the fire is gonna do what we want it to do in terms of not just fire behavior, but smoke management. So the sequence that we fire a unit actually is really influential in allowing us to get smoke up and out. So one of the things that we're looking at, one of the biggest drivers we're looking at when it comes to these prescribed fires is making sure that the smoke isn't going to be an impact for the public. So that's something that we're really concerned with, and making sure that we're designing our strategy to facilitate that. I also want to talk just a little bit about the equipment and staffing needs. So it takes a number of different organizations and agencies to get this work done. Typically, we may have 7 or more different agencies, typically over 25 staff on a given burn. They come from all over Central Texas and sometimes further to help us out with these operations. And it really takes a lot of hands and a lot of equipment to get it done safely. And that just goes back to, these are typically they're small organizations, right? And we're trying to get a lot of work done. And so we rely on one another to achieve that work. So it's, if we're not burning on our own lands under our management, we're hoping to help out folks on with their operations to meet their land management objectives. So let's see here. We go into notifications as well. So this is really critically important, making sure that we're communicating with not just the public, but also the emergency responders in the area, so that they know and can anticipate that there's going to be smoke in the area. If they start getting 911 calls, that hey, this is something that's been planned. We've been in touch with the folks who are planning it. We're expecting it, anticipating it, and that they can provide timely and useful information to the public about that operation. So the notifications are really key. Getting that word out to the public that it's going to happen, getting that word out to emergency responders, so they know to expect it, and also to our stakeholders and neighbors. We want to be good neighbors and make sure that we're not not surprising anybody with the operations. We work really hard to get those notifications out to everyone who needs them. And I'll put a plug in now. I think Audrey can drop it in the chat, but you can sign up. We've got a mailing email list to get those notifications. Even if you live nowhere near where we're burning, you can sign up on this list, and you'll get notifications throughout as we're planning burns and putting fire on the ground. So definitely encourage you to sign up for that if you're interested in it. So during the burn, we're really just we're focused on monitoring the conditions, right? Once fire is on the ground, we want to be sure that we can anticipate what it's going to do throughout the day, throughout the operational period, which is what we call our work day on a prescribed fire. So taking a step back just a little bit, we do get weather spot forecasts produced by the National Weather Service. So these spot forecasts are really, really specific. We'll let them know exactly where we're burning, what kind of fuel we're burning in, and what the landscape looks like. And we'll provide weather observations taken at the site of the burn unit prior to ignition. We'll provide all that information and more to the Weather Service, and they'll generate a very specific forecast, which is for that piece of ground. So this is a really key tool. It really helps us to understand what we can expect throughout the day. And you can see on this slide, I do have a spot forecast from a previous burn in there, and you can see how it's kind of broken down. You've got 10 a.m. through 5 p.m. So we get that hourly forecast and all of the different variables that we're looking at and making sure that we're anticipating going into the shift. So we'll get that spot, and typically we'll get it not just the day of the burn, but also a day or two after the burn. And we'll just keep requesting them as long as we need them. So if it turns into we're mopping up for a few days and we want to make sure that we're ready for any weather events coming down the pike, we can continue to order those spot forecasts and make sure that we're getting the most timely and accurate information we can get about the weather for the burn. So those spot forecasts are a really critical tool, but we also need to be monitoring what we're seeing on the ground. So we take weather on the hour, and we're looking at generally temperature, humidity, wind, speed and direction, and a few other factors. We're looking at those particularly hard. to make sure that not just they're in line with what our expectations are for the day, but also that they're in line with the forecast. So if what we're seeing isn't representative of what we were expecting for that day, we can call the forecast office and get an update and kind of talk with the meteorologist to help us understand what the weather is going to be doing or is doing that day. So we're constantly looking at the weather, constantly taking those measurements to make sure that we're really anticipating and understanding what's going on the ground. So that's a really key tool for us, just to be able to monitor the weather throughout the day. We're also, the weather can be kind of a funny thing, because on-site weather is really important. And when you get a forecast in the morning, it's produced by your local news station or what have you. They might be looking at slightly different things than we are. So one thing that I want to stress is sometimes we'll be burning and it may seem like a windy day, but what we're doing is based on what we're seeing on site and making sure that what we're getting on site is driving our decisions. So if we're getting, and a number of different factors can influence something like wind, for example. So just your position in the county, if it's, if you're working around fronts, where that front is impacting different parts of the region. And even topography is a big one, friction from surface wind just kind of moving over the landscape, right? You may get different winds in different parts of the county. So the key thing to understand is whatever the forecast is for the day, we're getting really specific detailed forecasts for where we're burning. And we won't burn if it's not in prescription. And if you have a forecast that looks really good on your side of the county, but it doesn't look good for us on our side of the county, we're not going to proceed with that operation. And just the same, if you're getting really windy winds, if you're getting a lot of wind in the part of the area of the county that you're living in, but we're not getting those winds, then you might see smoke on a day you weren't expecting it if you're driving across town. So just be aware of that. We're really concerned with where we're getting wind and what speeds we're getting, and that's something that we're constantly monitoring throughout the day. So getting into that, the benefits, right? So this seems tricky. This seems like it's complex. Why do we do it? And there are a number of really meaningful benefits that we get out of implementing prescribed fires. And one of the biggest is the resilient landscapes, right? So when we put fire on the ground, we talked about this a little bit earlier. These are landscapes that haven't seen fire in often a very long time, and they're fire-dependent ecosystems. So when we implement a prescribed fire, they're kind of restoring and regenerating these systems that rely on fire. And so reintroducing that in a safe, controlled way that's going to achieve fire effects, but also is going to get that system back on the landscape is a really key management tool for us. These grasslands where we're burning, they evolved with and they require fire in order to function. When we stop burning, they start to lose some of that function. So it's critical that we're able to get that back into normal function. In savanna systems, we see increases in forage for pollinators and wildlife. So we get a lot of milkweed, which is great monarch habitat, allows them to reproduce. Just really an abundance of diversity when we burn. And that's a huge benefit as well, just having that really diverse landscape where, you're able to get a number of different species that are able to kind of take whatever punches may be coming when it comes to drought or future weather events. You have that really diverse landscape with a lot of species, and that something is going to thrive under a wide variety of conditions. So that's really important for us. And by reducing the overall accumulation of dead, downed, and diseased vegetation, we're actually able to reduce the fuel loading during these prescribed burns. And in really droughty, really dry years, when you see a lot of fire, a lot of wildfires in the area, should we have one on the lands where we're burning, you're going to see a reduction in fire intensity if it were to impact one of these properties. And so that's going to basically reduce the likelihood of severe fire, which is the big problem, right? If you have severe fire, massive landscape impacts, and it can really degrade the landscape. And that's one of the benefits here. The reason we manage the lands we manage is for water quality, in particular the WQPL, water quality protection lands. And so making sure that we are preventing that severe impact to the soil is going to keep soil on the ground, keep good cover over that soil, and prevent it from being severely impacted by wildfires, which can create runoff and all sorts of problems for water quality. And so why exactly, I've talked a lot about soil, why is that something that we're concerned with? Well, this land that is under management with the water quality protection lands, it's sitting over a karst aquifer, karst geology. So this is really porous limestone, water that impacts the landscape up at the surface level, gets down into the Edwards aquifer really, really fast in a karst geology setting. So what we're trying to do with keeping soil on the landscape is to keep good cover in, right? We're able to soak up a lot of water, get it into the ground, get it into the aquifer where it's going to come out in your springs and into your well. If you're working off of well water, it feeds our water supply in Austin as well. So getting that water into the ground is really key. And being able to preserve this land is going to make sure that it's really high quality water. So what goes in is what you get out. Karst geology doesn't really filter all that well because it goes in really quickly. So being able to set that land aside is a really, really key tool to making sure that we're going to get that water, prevent runoff and make sure that we're not getting water that is, get impacted by chemicals and all. Sorry, I'm diving off here, but the key is that we're able to get water in the ground, get clean water in the ground, and make sure that it's high quality. So the landscape is really good at getting water into the ground, and these savanna systems are really good at getting into the ground, and that's the key for us, is making sure that we're able to protect that. So the other part of it is water quantity. So we're not just getting high quality water into the ground, we're getting a lot of it when we do get these rain spells that are significant. And so as a community, we've already done the hardest part, right? Setting that land aside is the most important thing that we can do. So by setting that land aside and making sure that it's there, that we're able to get water into the aquifer, in terms of management, we're just trying to be good stewards of that land. We're getting the water now, and we're just trying to make sure that we're able to manage it in a way that's appropriate, make sure that we continue to get it. But you guys have already done the hard work by voting to secure this land and by voting to manage it. So kind of a kudos to the voters in Austin and the people in this area who decided that this was an important value for them. And I do want to note as well, we've got something like 23% of the Edwards Aquifer recharge zone under management that's protected either by a conservation easement or by outright fee simple ownership. So it's really not an insignificant amount of land that's being protected. So it's a really big thing. So bringing this all back to prescribed fire, the work isn't conducted in isolation. So we strive really hard to be a learning organization. So as we go through each burn, we try to learn from it, try to understand what went well, what didn't go well, and how we can improve going forward. And that goes with the management as well, and to make sure that we're adapting to what we're seeing in terms of fire effects and adapting in terms of our management. So, we work to assess the impacts of seasonality on fire effects. That's a really big one. Burning at different times of the year has different impacts on the vegetation and different impacts on our outcomes, right? So we're trying to dial in our prescriptions to make sure that we're burning at times when we're going to get the best fire effects, that we're meeting those objectives that we talked about earlier. So that's a really important thing for us, is just to be trying to dial it in and make sure that we're getting what we're hoping to get out of the operation. Another point on that is, we want to make sure that we're following up with post-burn seeding when we burn. So the image that you're looking at right now is actually our humidity's got a little low that day, so we called off the burn early. We were just doing some pile burning, and so we got a little low on the humidity, decided we'd shut it down and mop everything up. And we were able to come back through that same day and seed the areas that we had burned. So that's what you're looking at on screen. Making sure that you're getting seeds back on the ground and making sure that you're rehabbing what you're burning. And we do this on broadcast burns as well, not necessarily on the same day that we burn. But we want to follow up the treatments that we're doing, and then putting fire on the landscape is doing a lot of the work. But we're able to really turbocharge it when we were following that up with the seeding treatments. And I really want to tout our native grass nursery that's been set up in the past year by Andrew McNeil Marshall, one of our biologists. We're actually growing, native grasses that, we harvested seeds from on our landscape, really unique, really cool, rare plants that exist on the landscape already. And we're harvesting seed from that, growing it, propagating it in a nursery. We can continue to harvest seeds from those nurse plants and put that out on the landscape. So we're able to follow up on our treatments and get more diversity, more abundance of different species with that effort. So the monitoring and making sure that we're getting good fire effects is really, really important. And following that up as well with restoration is a key tool as well. So it doesn't just stop on burn day. With all of this stuff, it's a continuous process to make sure that you're working in the right direction, and it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of planning to make sure that all of those things line up, and that's just the nature of the beast. We also perform vegetation transects annually, and so that's across all of the lands under our management. And so they've got a schedule that they stick to, and every spring we'll go out and count the species. So that's what a transect is. For us, it's an 800-foot line that has been marked. They walk the same line every time they do a transect on that particular piece of ground. And we're counting species that we find and encounter along that stretch. And it's a really good way to understand what you're seeing on the landscape and what we're getting. And I can say for some of the units that we burned repeatedly, I think the figure was 396 different species out of the 913 that exist in Hays County. So you're looking at, and I think this is vascular species. So you're looking at the units that we've burned repeatedly have almost half of the species that occur in Hays County in those sites. That's really cool. And it's a really measurable way of saying, yeah, this works. We need to do more of it because we are getting this diversity the more often that we're able to burn. And following up with seeding treatments is just really accelerating that process. So that's the presentation, the guts of it. Want to open it up for any questions that you guys may have.
Great. We have some questions and coming in, and Matt, let me know. I'm going to ask some questions, and some of these are about sort of the ecology of the region, and I'm happy to chime in as is helpful. Together we'll tackle these questions. Okay. First is, what exactly is a savanna? I know we've been talking about savanna. The question is it a grassland dotted with single trees like an African savanna?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have a number of different categories. So when I talk about a savanna, we're talking about an area with maybe 10% canopy cover, but there is a gradient. So it can get as low as 5% canopy cover and up to maybe 30% canopy cover. But yeah, you do have trees that exist in the savanna. We've got some really beautiful examples of post oak savannas where we've got a lot of little blue stem, big blue stem, really abundant native grasses, and then an overstory of post oaks, probably a bit higher than 20% canopy cover. But there is a gradient, and I don't know what the high end of that would be. I would say somewhere between 5 and 30%. If you have any thoughts on that, Audrey, I'm welcome them.
Yeah, that's up to about 30%. Yeah, I think you're totally right. You've got like open canopy clumps of trees up to like 30% canopy cover, and then a pretty much continuous layer of grasslands. Right, exactly. And we live in a place where we have native grassland savanna, which is really cool because it's also one of our globally endangered ecosystems. Okay, next question. And again, feel free to put questions in the Q&A. I see some more coming in. Great. So exactly which habitats are fire dependent? Austin straddles Blackland Prairie and Balcones Canyonlands, two completely different geologies, topographies, and ecosystems. The first was reported as more grass 150 plus years ago, and the second was reported to be mostly forested. So how are we talking about which habitats are fire dependent?
Yeah, so I think certainly the Blackland Prairie has a strong fire history, and even into and I want to venture more towards the Edwards Plateau, if we characterize it that way, we kind of in Austin, we straddle this gradient where you have a transition zone from the savanna to more of a forested setting. And within that, you have a number of different vegetation types that exist. Because it's a transition zone, I bet there's pockets that have been woody and wooded for a long time. And the same with the grasslands. There are probably spots that have kind of meandered between the two based on climatic conditions. But with that general ecoregion, when I'm talking about fire dependent ecosystems, I'm thinking of those savannas that exist on our properties, have existed south and to the west of us. We're talking Hayes County. But I want to stress too that all of this is just vegetation that's native to the landscape. So whether you're dealing with juniper or you're dealing with big bluestem prairies, little bluestem prairies, it's all been here and it's always been here. So it all has a place on that landscape, and more at some point or another has probably interacted with fire, whether that's over a really, really, really long timeline or on pretty frequent timelines.
Great. And so another question came in for how many burns per year do we conduct? Is it a few dozen? What does that look like year to year?
Yeah, I would say historically over the course of the program, so the Wildland Conservation Division has had a prescribed fire program for just about 20 years. And I would say that number has been as low as 0 burns in a year, on years where we had transitions going on with staff changes. Up to perhaps 12 in a year. If we're going to meet all of the objectives that we would like to meet, we're striving for once every other week, once a week would be the interval that we're looking at, putting some sort of fire back on the landscape. So the volume of work that's in front of us is significant, and being able to make sure that we're meeting those objectives, meeting our safety objectives, and getting the work done is really key. But once you establish a rhythm and you're burning regularly, it becomes easier to burn more regularly. I think it's just one of those machines that once you turn it on and it gets to moving, you can really get into a rhythm. And when you have interruptions, whether that's drought or weather-related interruptions or just personnel changes, that can really slow you down. So it's varied for sure, but I would love to get us to the point where we're burning every other week.
And speaking of that timeline, when we think about summer versus winter burns, what are some of the benefits of both of those, or when do we choose to burn in the summer sometimes versus the winter? What does that kind of time frame look like?
Yeah, so we like to think of the summer burn season as a time of year when we can get a lot of good fire on the ground, and it favors natives, is what some of the research has produced, is that if you burn when it's hot in the summer, King Ranch bluestem, which is an exotic grass that we struggle to deal with and it is a problematic throughout the hill country, throughout Texas, tends to be that when we burn in the summer, we see better outcomes for the natives than the KR bluestem. However, I would say that we've recently seen on a bunch of winter burns, going through these vegetation transects and looking at what we've gotten after burns, we've seen some mixed results. And so I think that's becoming more of an open question, at least internally. And so that's the thing with all of this. We just have to be constantly reassessing what we're seeing and making sure that we're using the best available data. So it might be that summer burns really do favor the natives, and that's what we should really prioritize in terms of the ecological benefit. But we're ready to kind of pivot and be more interested in winter burns as fulfilling that ecological need based on what we get with further research. So things ebb and flow, but right now in the past 2 or 3 years, the drive has been for getting more summer burning done to favor those native grasses. Winter burns tend to be good for maintenance. So if you already have an area that's in a savanna state or pretty grassy, you're not going to impact very much of the brush or shrubs or mature trees with a burn like that. But you are going to be reintroducing fire into the grasses, and that'll that's good. That's to the benefit of all of the other things we talked about. It does increase diversity, even if it's less than a summer burn, based on that research that I referred to earlier. But yeah, we can burn any time of year, and it tends to be that the winter burns are more maintenance burns that you would carry out in an area that's already mostly a savanna.
Great. Okay, I have another kind of more ecology question. So since the Balcones Canyonlands, so like the Edward Plateau has limestone, bedrock, and shallow soils where woody plants are more effective at producing a dense cover and increasing limestone porosity, especially on slopes. Do you focus your burns on areas with pockets of deeper soils to make sure that the prairie plants can develop deeper roots like that match your diagram? So I think, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Audrey.
Oh, I was just gonna, say like, so in regards to like where you burn in regards to topography and thinking about soils.
Yeah, I would say in general, most of the ground that we're burning has deeper soils than you'll find in the northwest side of Austin. That's not uniformly true, but in general, that's a pretty fair characterization. We have much deeper soils, and that's that Hayes County area. I would say that looking at the more porous soils, whatever vegetation cover you have is good, right? So it's better to have vegetation growing than not. So we always want to be really cognizant of that. And if we're working in sensitive areas, much longer fire return intervals for that reason. We don't want to jar anything. We want to make sure that we're able to keep good soil cover over a series of years, because it might be a series of years before we get back to that area.
Great. Okay, so are there volunteer fire forces here like there are in the Pacific Northwest?
So volunteer fire forces, is the question referring more to like volunteer fire departments, or?
I think for like wildfire, I'm assuming, and feel free to add some clarification, but I'm assuming this is like a wildfire forces. I guess there can be a couple of questions. One, maybe let's talk about, are there sort of collaborative wildfire forces in Texas like there are in the Pacific Northwest, as one question, and then maybe are there collaborative prescribed fire groups in the area too, working on that that aspect?
Yeah. So we do have, we rely heavily on our cooperators in the area. So that's at pretty much every level of government. We have federal, state, and local partners. We also have partners in the nonprofit world as well. So there is a loose coalition called the Central Texas Prescribed Fire Council, and that's composed of a number of different land management agencies primarily, and it's a useful tool for kind of planning, sequencing burns throughout the year, because we only all have so many staff, and probably what I described is, hey, I'd love to be burning every other week. Most everybody else participating in that organization would like to be doing the same thing. So it does take a lot of coordination amongst the folks who are doing prescribed fire in this area to make sure that we can all meet something approaching our objectives. So there is a lot of coordination there, and there's also a lot of coordination as well with our partners in the suppression world. So a lot of those skill sets overlap, and we coordinate pretty closely with folks with the Austin Fire Department and Travis County ESDs, Hayes County as well, just to make sure everyone's on the same page with what we have planned. Hey, does that answer the question, Audrey? Did I miss anything?
No, yeah, I think that's great. And feel free, anyone can add, another sort of question as it comes up. This is an interesting question. So are controlled burns an effective tool for breaking up a monoculture of something like, say, Texas thistle? Would burning that allows for more herbaceous and grass diversity to come in, would it allow for that? And are there heat requirements? Like how hot does a burn have to be? What are you aiming at to effectively increase that diversity and kind of knock back that monoculture?
Yeah, and I think it definitely depends on just as the question said, Texas thistle specifically. I would say residence time is really helpful. So when I say residence time, I'm getting at a high amount of time that fire is spent on a given piece of landscape. So if you have high residence time, really slow creeping fire is what I'm getting at. You're really getting pretty full consumption. And that can be super helpful if you're dealing with a lot of invasive stuff, because you're going to have native seeds in that seed bank, and having that high residence time might help to favor, might get complete consumption in some of the less desirable species that you have in that mix, and give the natives a better shot. So that's something. But also just on the hot end, hotter burns, and we're not sure the mechanism exactly, but that research indicating that hotter burns favored the natives might just have to do with it's resetting everything at the same time. So if you get really hot fire, everything suffers in the same way in terms of reproduction. And so the natives are adapted to that. They're used to fire. They get it. So they're able to really take a jump start, whereas perhaps the KR is less adapted, and it kind of is on the back foot, right? So that's a mechanism that we've speculated on, but I don't think it's fully understood at this point. But I would say if you're putting fire back on a landscape that is accustomed to fire, you're going to get more diversity. So that'll certainly help.
And one person brought up that also maybe burning brush piles over a dense area of a monoculture could be a good small landowner solution for kind of creating an open area to then reseed with a diverse mix of natives.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one tool that we've been using recently has been, we've avoided pile burning for a good portion of our history at the WQPL, because we've had some concerns about whether or not it would impact water quality. But what we're finding, we've recently started to experiment with it a little bit, and that's what we've seen. We've been burning piles that are mostly composed of juniper, and they burn pretty quickly. So you've achieved full consumption within 2-3 hours, pretty close to that. And if you're tending those, you're rolling them in, and by rolling them in, I mean, you're making sure, just like a good campfire, right? You're keeping it compacted. You're making sure that you're getting everything consumed down to ash or coal. You're actually not impacting the soil below maybe an inch or two very severely at all. Soil is a really great insulator, so it takes a long time for fire to impact deep soils. So we're reseeding those almost immediately, and we're getting, in some cases, less than 3 months after a burn, pile burn, we're getting native grasses in. And just like that person in the chat said, you are really setting back whatever was there, whatever vegetation was there at the time of that pile burn, but you're not impacting the soil below it, and you're putting seeds in there that are going to allow the natives to get a foothold. So I definitely think that that's a great comment.
Here's a soil related question. Since many Balcones Canyon shallow soils are degraded and lack significant organic matter, kind of what steps are taking to increase soil health and biology? This person's concerned about the long-term frequent burning effects on soil carbon and organic matter, and research that has shown that it depletes that. So I guess, what's the connection between that, and how are we thinking about soil health and carbon in relation to our prescribed fire and savanna management?
Yeah, so I think that I'm not going to get too deep into that question because it's not my area of expertise. We've talked a lot about that, and so I know you'll find relevant information on it in the WQPL's land management plan. But I believe specifically related to soil organic matter, there was a recent paper in 2021, Pellegrini, I think, that discussed that, and it might have some information specific to what we're doing in dealing with grasslands. I would go back again to a lot of the areas that we're burning specifically are actually have pretty strong soil bases. When you think of really highly degraded soils, they also don't have a ton of grass. So it's not a great place necessarily for fire early on, because there's not much continuity to burn. It's been my experience. You need that continuous fuel bed to really carry fire. So fire could be a tool in a system like that, but it might not be. It's really site specific. And so you might need to take some other restoration steps to get that place to a point where it's ready to receive fire. with all of this work, whatever cover type you're managing for, we're inheriting some really heavily degraded areas, and in some cases they're degraded in that they have very little soil. In other places they still have their soil, but they have a monoculture of species that are not helpful, right? If we have a field of KR blue stem from just overgrazing and trying to put seed back in the ground, it's going to give the cows something to eat. That's also degraded. So a lot of what we burn in looks more like the latter than the former. But certainly, I would point you towards our LMP, the land management plan. There should be more detail on there about that. And I do think there is that Pellegrini paper. I don't know if that's relevant to link in the chat, but might have more information for you.
Thanks, Matt. I'll get that Pellegrini link. That is, some recent information. There's, I know, a body of literature on sort of burning and soil organic matter. And I think there's more research coming out, because it really depends, I think, also, right, on fire intensity and like how regular that fire is, because there's also benefits to prescribed fire and carbon because of the ash and the adding carbon to the soil as well as a practice. So another question, this is kind of related to like what you said, is if there's no grass, you can't really burn. There's no like consistency of fuel. So one of, I know, the goals of managing a savanna, which tends to have a pretty, and like a healthy savanna will have some clumps of trees, like an open canopy, but a pretty consistent layer of grass. So this person's concerned that grass growing under short trees are prone to torching. So they are wondering how we keep that from happening, or what that looks like during a burn. How are we thinking about fine fuels and canopy?
So if I'm understanding the question correctly, just are we concerned with torching, or are we concerned with mitigating fine fuels under canopy? Is that
the question is how to keep grasses from growing under short trees, which is, I don't think, something we can concerns us, because I think the goal is to have a pretty consistent layer of fine fuel to carry that fire, like low frequency fire, across the landscape. But they're wondering, the exact question is, what do you do to keep grasses from growing under our short trees, since they're more prone to torching?
Gotcha. Yeah, and a lot of times actually those trees, depending on what species, juniper really doesn't have a lot of grass growing under it anyway. I think it's a vegetation type, ash juniper specifically, that I don't think wants to burn any more than anything else does, and it's really effective at keeping fire out of it when fuel moistures are high. So a lot of times we will find that if we're burning when the live fuel moistures are up, that the juniper is quite resistant to fire. You might get a little bit of scorch. When I say scorch, I mean just impact of radiant heat on the vegetation. But typically, if the fuel moistures are high, not enough to really seriously impact that specific plant. But yeah, we're not as worried about the really, when I think of like short trees, I'm thinking that early regeneration juniper. If you're talking about oaks or, trees that maybe are in that 15, 20 foot height range, they are going to have grass under them, but they're adapted to that. So we might find that, and typically when we're burning, we're not seeing torching. Scorch is what we're getting, is the most relevant fire effect. So that's just, again, that radiant heat impacting the leaves. And generally in the oaks, they recover if it's just scorch. They'll put on new leaves, they're evergreens. It might take them a while to push it out depending on the time of year, but typically the oaks recover really well. With understory and juniper, there's hardly any grass at all. So if you're dealing with a denser area of juniper, you're likely to find, unless you're burning at really low fuel moistures, that they're not going to be receptive to fire unless it's conditions on the high end. And then just so with vegetation that's a little bit, trees that are out in the open, they're exposed, they're in a grassy area. you know, that's part of getting fire back on the landscape, right? There's that push-pull between savanna and forest, and they likely, those smaller early succession junipers that are just coming back, they're likely not going to survive that interaction with fire depending on the time of year, but you're not going to lose that cover. The grass is still going to be there, and it's going to benefit from it. So, you know, it's just that interplay of you know, of the landscape, and it's really cool to kind of see it all play out, and to see how different areas are able to thrive under a variety of conditions.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. That's great. And I'll just add to Matt's too, is that we're burning these savanna ecosystems, and one of the threats to these grassland, predominantly grassland ecosystems, is brush encroachment. So like Matt says, that's one of the tools for managing that and making sure you have a healthy, resilient savanna ecosystem, is to manage that encroaching brush. But we're not talking about burning like closed canopy warbler woodland. We're talking about burning these savanna ecosystems that evolved with fire for the health of these ecosystems. Okay, great. We've got another question for like the origin of prescribed fire. Why do we do it? So this person has heard that ranchers used to burn their pastures. Is that the origin of prescribed fire? Why we would use it?
Yeah, fire, that's a really interesting question, and I think I could spend a while on it, but fire and humans just have a really rich history, right? So we've used fire as a tool for as long as we've been a species, in some way or another. So, you know, there is a pretty rich history of indigenous burning, not just in the United States, but around the world. And I think we as practitioners of prescribed fire can learn a lot from that indigenous burning, particularly when it comes to seasonality, right? I like to think, you know, if I don't get quite the right burn day, I don't meet my fire effects objectives, you know, that's not the end of the world, right? But throughout history and across the world and across Texas and across the United States, if you missed your window, and you were relying on that window because you knew that if you burn at a certain time, you get a certain vegetation type or cover, which gives you something to eat. Well, that's putting food on your table, right? For lack of a better term. So I think we have a lot to learn from past practices with fire from indigenous peoples, but it's been used as a tool for a long time. I think the thought that ranchers used fire is probably a bit of a misconception. I don't think it was a tool used as widely by ranchers, just because you know, your cattle are relying on that grass. So in my experience, particularly on the suppression side, you might have a fire and threatening a home, but the rancher is way more concerned with saving his pasture, right? So the home is insured, the crop isn't. So making sure that your cattle have something to eat is really important. And I think the exclusion of fire, not just because of suppression, but also because people were seeing other benefits, right? We're reading benefits into the propagation of mesquite, even prickly pear. It was somewhat desired because your cows can eat prickly pear when they eat all the grass, if you scorch the needles off. So there's kind of a history of ranching and using everything available to you to get your cows fed. And fire is not necessarily intuitive, and that's changed a lot recently. And I think you're seeing more use of fire for rangeland management nowadays. But at the time that that European settlement occurred in Texas, I don't think that was necessarily intuitive, and a lot of fire stopped getting used as that westward expansion continued. And as you saw, indigenous peoples move to different parts of the state, or leave outright, or be forced out from places that had existed for a long time. So I guess going back to it, prescribed fire as a management tool, it's been used by people across the world, across the United States, and across Texas for a long time. And we're only just kind of getting back into the use of fire as a society, because there were a lot of reasons not to burn, and there remain a lot of reasons not to burn, just in terms of pressures, right? It's not intuitive necessarily. And so there's certainly always a reason to say, I don't know if we should do that here. But often it's something that we need to do, that are the systems that we interact with and depend on require as well. So that get off my soapbox on that.
Great. And I wanted to make sure to have time to thank Matt Laurie for this today, and also talk about this prescribed fire is a huge part of really powerful restoration tool for our water quality protection lands program. There's a big community of folks doing it. You can see all these folks in the slide. It takes a huge amount of preparation and thought and care. And we're really lucky to have a lot of very talented people, including Matt, on our team and in our community to help keep these grasslands resilient and healthy so that they can keep doing their job of and do a better job of getting water underground. So with that, I'm also going to say, put a plug in, I'm the volunteer coordinator. Is that another aspect of our land restoration really involves the community. So we're a small team here on the water quality protection lands, and we really rely on our wonderful crew of volunteers, some of whose names I see today. Hello, thank you for all you do. We right now are collecting a lot of native grass and wildflower seeds. Often we'll see the effects of prescribed burn areas. We've been doing these plant surveys recently to look at the effects of prescribed fire and treatments and seeding treatments, and there's tons of seed. This is a great year to get it. So we'll be out and about collecting native grass and wildflower seeds, and then using that later on to seed areas that need it. So places that were mostly King Ranch blue stem and haven't recovered post burn, we'll go out and put a lot of native grass and wildflower seed on those to kind of increase that resilience and diversity. So that's just a plug for that. I put in the chat, I put a bunch of links. One is to that land management plan. We recently had the Texas A&M researchers create an updated land management plan for the WQPL as of 2022. We update that about every 10 years. So you can see that. I don't know why that link didn't hyperlink, but it's that bit.ly link, WQPL LMP, amazing acronym string. Also, where we'll be posting a recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel and Facebook, and you can also see other videos as well there on that YouTube channel. We also have a monthly e-newsletter we send out, so we'll be sending that out at the beginning of each month to just have updates around what's going on in the community, what's happening in terms of land management, community-led restoration on the Balcones Canyon Lands Preserve and the water quality protection lands, and come out and take a guided hike or volunteer with us. That's that link with that wildland events. Oh, I'm seeing some folks aren't seeing the link, so I'm going to resend it. Thanks for letting me know about that. Matt, any sort of final words before we?
Yeah, I appreciate you all coming out and listening to us talk about the wildlands. It's a pleasure to be able, and really it's just amazing to be able to work out here and do this work, and that comes mainly out of the support that you as the public give to us, and I just really appreciate that, and I hope that we're doing everything we can to make sure that you're getting the landscapes that you deserve, and you're getting high quality water and an abundance of it down at Barton Springs when you go to recreate and out of your taps. So I just appreciate the opportunity to talk, and appreciate everyone coming out to listen.
Great. All right. Well, thanks again, everybody, for being here. Thanks again, Matt, and hope to see you out on the land someday soon. All right. Take care.
Bye.